That said, you're buying a home. It's like, you're not per se buying an investment. Now, obviously, it's a large outlay, and you want it to appreciate. And historically, the primary driver of building personal wealth and family wealth, an important element of it is real estate, owning real estate. But if it doesn't go up for a year, you're still living in a home.
Welcome to Get Real 411, the podcast where real experts give real advice on all things real estate. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Brad.
Join us as we explore real estate successes and pitfalls through the eyes of our esteemed guests.
Now let's get real.
Today we have with us the CEO of one of the largest wholesale lenders in the country. We have Willie Newman from Homepoint.
Welcome, Willie.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Brad. How you guys doing?
We're doing great. How's it going for you?
Good. It's Friday.
It is Friday. And it has been another great week in the mortgage industry with our market going on its roller coaster ride.
I guess it's great if you like roller coasters, right? So a lot of people like roller coasters.
I think the three of us are gluttons for punishment. We've been in this business for too long. We enjoy the ride, no matter where it takes us, right?
Well, that's people actually ask me about that, and it's like there's a certain the complexity is very interesting to me. It really is one of the things that keeps me motivated. Now, I could probably use a little less complexity at some particular times, but I really do enjoy it.
Well, I'll tell you what, Willie, this segues really into kind of your story nicely because, like Jamie said, we've all been in this industry for way too long. But if you recall, I made a comment that said, I'm not the real OG because I started in 93. But
right.
We'd love to hear, for our audience, hear your story of how you started in the business. It was quite different back then. But there were some things about the industry, the loan industry, that have repeated themselves most recently. And so we'd just love to, have you share your story of how you started and just what's transpired over the years.
Sure. So, I graduated in 1986 from up here in Ann Arbor, University of Michigan. And my first job out of school was at a small savings and loan in Dearborn, Michigan, just a little bit down the way from Ann Arbor here. And I was really kind of learning the savings and loan business there. And one of the things they asked me to do was figure out how to sell loans to Freddie Mac. And of course, all of this was just absolutely new to me. I had no ideas, but it seemed like an interesting assignment. And so I really dug in and read the manual, figured out how to do it, ended up doing it. We formed some securities. I ended up selling those securities, and it really was very interesting. And so I kind of had that behind me. And fortunately, a few months after that, I met a gentleman who became my mentor in the business. His name was Stan Rhodes, and he was the CEO of another small savings and loan that was in the town of Ypsilanti, Michigan, right next to Ann Arbor here. And what Stan saw at the time, he had built a very small, thriving mortgage banking business, had a number of retail loan officers originating loans, but he really wanted to grow it and figured out that there was a better or an emerging way to grow the business. And so what he saw was really the confluence of several different trends. One was that, of course, the savings and loan crisis, which took place in the mid 80s. We think about the capital markets for mortgage loans being primarily Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, Ginnie Mae. Back then, the primary source of capital was the savings and loans. And so when those savings and loans started to fail, especially the larger ones, the sources of capital for mortgage or loans started to become displaced. At the same time, as you might imagine, most of the originators back then worked for savings and loans because that's where the money was. And so they also started becoming displaced. The other additional trend he saw was really how the agencies had started to evolve. So as I said, when I sold my first batch of loans to Freddie Mac, I did everything in the process, which included actually shipping documents to Chicago from Michigan in order to get those loans securitized. And when I did it, I said, I don't know how scalable, even at 23 years old, I was like, I don't know how scalable this is. But the agencies had evolved even in that intervening period to the point where what Stan saw was that they were becoming more technologically enabled so that you could actually use data instead of the physical documents in order to sell loans, as an example. So he saw that occurring also. And so finally, there was a legal construct in place called a mortgage brokerage. And at the time, mortgage brokerages were primarily focused on what back then was called hard money loans. So it was really kind of on the fringes of mortgage lending, where the savings and loan wouldn't do it, and Freddie and Fannie or Ginnie wouldn't do it. Then a broker would find a source of funds. It could be a person, people like you two or me. It could be a pool of capital, et cetera. But it's really kind of non-traditional in its orientation. But the legal construct itself could be used for mainstream lending as well. And he saw that some of those loan officers that were becoming displaced from savings and loans started to migrate into that construct. Um, and so you kind of put all that together, and what he had figured out is that you could grow and we were a very small savings and loan, you could grow a mortgage business quite dramatically, attaching to Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae for sources of capital, attaching to mortgage brokerages, both for the originations themselves, but also helping loan officers understand that that was a great place to kind of hang their shingle, so to speak. And being a small savings and loan, we didn't have a lot of capital, but if we could leverage the agencies, we could leverage mortgage brokers, so we get outside of our physical footprint as far as originations go. We could grow a much larger business than if you looked at this 4 branch savings and loan you think could take place. And so he saw all of that, and he brought me on. I was in the capital market side because I sold loans a couple times to Freddie Mac, so I had tons of experience. So he saw all that. He brought me on, and the two things I learned from that experience, which from that start became what eventually, through a couple different times being acquired and additional capital being put into the business, became ABN AMRO Mortgage Group, which is a top 5 originator, top 10 servicer. Our originations were always centered on mortgage brokers. But the two things I learned from that experience was that is, one, dislocation creates opportunity. So Brad, you said at the beginning, there are parallels to even what's happening today. And we're in the middle of a massive dislocation in the mortgage business right now. And back then, I didn't realize how massive it was, but it was a massive dislocation because of the savings and loan crisis in the mortgage business back then. And so that's what created the opportunity for us. Which, if you looked at us kind of on an isolated basis, you would say there's no way these guys are going to be able to grow, to become a top 5 lender. No one would have predicted it, probably even us. But we were able to, because we saw that dislocation. We positioned the company to take advantage of it, and fortunately, we were able to do so. The second thing I learned was the importance of culture, and I think that at the time I didn't realize that that's what we were developing, especially being as young as I was. But over time, what I realized was that in that iteration, it was kind of the unitary focus on the mission and the fact that there was this dislocation, and there was no reason why we should be able to take advantage of it. Really kind of coalesced into a culture that, I'd say elements of that DNA actually persist even today to Homepoint. So those things I really learned from the process. And as I said, I'll skip forward because it's a long career, but that eventually top 5 originator, top 10 servicer. That business was sold in 2007. I was the mortgage guy, so I got to take off most of the financial crisis, which was kind of a cool thing. And then, since then I've done 2 additional startups, the third of which, of course, is Homepoint.
That's amazing. You just took me down memory lane a little bit. I think I can still feel my hand cramping up from signing all the corporate assignments on the collateral that I used to have stacked in my office day after day after day. Remember when MERS came out and we thought it was the best thing since sliced bread? We couldn't believe we were finally. Yep, I remember all those days. And the funniest thing is, anytime we ever get the opportunity to chat with anybody that's been in the business for let's say 15 or more years, there's a very common theme. And the common theme is, nobody trained us. We grabbed a manual, and in our days, that was on paper, and we figured it out. And that is largely the way that Brad and I built the last company that we had, which was a pretty large wholesale and retail lender. We were in 43 states back before the crash, and wrote our own hard money product. And so I remember those days. I was much like yourself. I came in, I had very little experience, and I just, along with Brad, figured it out. And I love this concept that I think we have in common, which is our previous company was very much the same way. We had an unintentional culture, a very unintentional culture. And I believe that the unintentional culture drove largely our growth trajectory and our success with that company, it's cool to look at companies like Homepoint, and we've had such a great opportunity to spend a lot of time with you, with Will, with Phil, and see leaders who have come from very successful organizations with an unintentional culture, saw the value in it, and have now said, now let's be intentional about the culture that we build. And I love everything I'm seeing. Every time I ever have a chance to talk to anybody within the organization, at any level, they all seem genuinely happy to be there, genuinely committed to the shared mission. And so, we're taking a page out of your book here as we start to grow and scale our company and really try to be intentional about it.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah. And I mean, so, kind of the evolution of my thinking on it, like you said, Jamie, it was unintentional, but I recognized the value of it. And then, so the second startup I did, I was fortunate in that the vast majority of the people that were involved in that came from the places I was previously. And so there was a more intentional culture, but I didn't really have to define it that much because everyone kind of knew it. And then this time was different, and therefore I didn't want to risk the fact that I feel like it's a culture that is attractive to lots of people. That said, I didn't want to assume that one, that was the case, and two, that people would truly understand what it meant. And so, we've been very intentional about initially how we built it, but then how we really evolved it as we got larger. Because the one thing that I've kind of learned is that if it's kind of a cult of Willie, it's only going to go so far. But it needs to really be, the organization needs to embrace it and needs to understand it, and really it needs to be about them, not about me per se. I'm just the kind of the guy who kind of kicked it off and make sure we kind of align with it. But so that was kind of the evolution for me. But yeah, like you said, it's like the unintentional one worked pretty well, but I wanted to make sure that this one would be more sustainable.
100%. I mean, what's that saying? Good leaders don't create followers, they create more leaders. That's the only way you can really scale anything and ensure that the core foundation and fundamental mission and values really translates through.
That's right.
To every person at every level for, X amount of years into the future.
Yeah. So, Willie, I'd like to change gears for just a second. Our audience is made up of a lot of people in the industry, loan originators, real estate agents, that sort of thing, but also the consumers. And so, it's kind of a scary time. We've lived through different cycles. Of course, we talked about 2007, 2008. That was, in my opinion, way worse than what we're experiencing now, but different and the same in some ways, right? We're seeing big layoffs, companies closing, merging, things of that nature. But then again, from the consumer point of view, it's like, wow, housing was really on a tear, and now it's retracting. But how far back do I'd like to get kind of your insights on where you see housing headed in 2023, maybe into 2024, if you can, kind of picture that. And then what that means for like affordability and loan products, maybe loan products that existed before in tough times that don't exist today. We'd like to just kind of get your insight on that.
Sure. So I think we saw for the last several years before now, you saw a pretty significant amount of house price appreciation, which, to your point, even with low interest rates, started to make things less affordable, especially for kind of new entrants to the market, first-time home buyers, et cetera. What you're seeing now is we're in this kind of awkward middle period where you still have kind of the impact of that kind of hanging over the real estate part of it, and at the same time you have rates that are higher. So there again, using that word dislocation, there's somewhat of a dislocation right now. I do think that over time, so say going into 23, that we'll reach an equilibrium where home price appreciation, every indication is that's starting to flatten out to the point where it could drift down. I wouldn't expect it would drift down too far because there is such high demand for to be a homeowner. That said, kind of your ceiling on that to a certain extent is the affordability factor. So I think the offset to what's happened with rates to a certain extent will be that leveling off to perhaps a slight decline in appreciation, or maybe a small depreciation, so to speak. But I do think it's to a certain extent healthy in that it should reach more equilibrium. That said, I think in this interim period, it's challenging for homeowner or potential homeowners to know what to do. So I think once it settles out a little bit, I think it'll be more of an equilibrium point.
I think it's so important that originators in today's space, whether they're well established or whether they're newer, educate themselves and understand these things so that we can speak to our consumers and also to our referral partners about what's really happening today. The fear is largely driven by outlets like the media and others who actually aren't in the space that we're in. And so when I see these parallels drawn to, the pre-crash right before the Great Recession, to your very excellent point, there is still a massive demand. People are reaching home buying age in greater numbers in our population than ever in history. And so it is a very different cycle that we're in. It may feel a little reminiscent of it, but it is very different. There are very different driving factors. And I think it's going to be a very different transition through this.
Right. No, I would agree with that. I think, too, again, I'll use the word equilibrium in that. You've seen, people start to look at their home like it's an automatic investment gain, right? And last several years, it's probably been a very good trade to buy a home and then watch it appreciate. That said, you're buying a home. It's like you're not per se buying an investment. Now, obviously, it's a large outlay, and you want it to appreciate. And historically, the primary driver of building personal wealth and family wealth, an important element of it is real estate, owning real estate. But if it doesn't go up for a year, you're still living in a home, and it's your home. And there's things you can do to improve the value, not only the value, but the experience associated with the home, the comfort associated with the home. So it's like, let's not focus on what's going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months with that, appreciation. Find something you like, understand, what the opportunity is from a financial standpoint, but find something you like, make it your home, and know that over time, in all likelihood, you're going to get some form of appreciation through it. But don't look at it like it's a stock. Yeah. I mean, it's got way more utility than a piece of paper or what now is a bit and a byte that sits in an account.
Yep,
that's right. Well, and look, the reality is this: you can take any decade of a period of time and see that housing prices go up. I mean, when I sold my first home that I had bought in 1993, I sold in 1998, and I thought, I've hit the top of the market. Like, this is amazing. I sold that home for $220,000. Today, that's worth more than $1 million. Yeah, and so, right. But were there dips in between? Of course there were dips. But when you're thinking about, like you said, your primary residence, and start comparing it to what you're paying for rent, rent is out of control. And so you're investing in your future. There's not one period of time that's not worth buying a primary residence. There are other factors when you look to buy for investment property, but for a primary residence, there's never a bad time. The sooner, the better. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, again, the correlation between home ownership and wealth accumulation. I mean, if you own a home, chances are you're going to accumulate wealth at a much higher pace than if you don't own a home. It's just how the numbers work. Now, obviously, every individual situation is different. To your point, Brad, but I mean, the numbers don't lie. I mean, it just right. shows you that is a very solid foundation for wealth accumulation over time.
That's right. And one other thing I want to talk about when we talk about the consumer and buying homes, it is really tough, especially for youth today. They have so much information available to them. They're getting hit in TikTok and Instagram with, ads and people saying different things. And, you have made a very clear distinction at Homepoint that you're going to focus on the wholesale channel. Mm-hmm. Would you talk a little bit about why you made that decision, and then what it means to the consumer to use a broker, which is through the wholesale channel, versus a bank or what we call a retail organization, which is somebody that's not a broker that's lending their own money?
Sure. So first of all, I wore my hoodie today because I want to be a fintech guy today. I mean, this is my fintech outfit.
Love
so, it. The gray hair, I might have offset it a little bit, but we're going to go with the fintech look.
I love it.
But yeah, so when we started Homepoint 2015, one of the elements, probably no surprise based on my kind of career story, but we were looking for a dislocation, and in 15 there really wasn't any dislocation in the market that was apparent. And they could take different forms, but primarily we were looking at what part of the origination market would make the most sense for us to be most invested in. And in 15, we weren't really sure what that was. It wasn't apparent. And so we actually had every channel origination from 15 through to 2018. So we had call center, distributor retail, wholesale, correspondent. And in 18, what happened was rates started going up. And what we saw was there was a significant migration of loan officers from primarily from retail into brokerages, and then it's up with the wholesale channel. And so we said, wow, this is an interesting trend. And having past experience in wholesale, obviously there was that DNA there as well. And so we said, well, market is starting to become dislocated as rates go up. What's happening? Originators are migrating to wholesale. And so we said, we're going to make our primary channel wholesale. We're going to invest heavily in wholesale. We retained our other channels for some period of time. We got rid of our distributor retail or branches first, because there was a kind of incongruency amongst those two segments, at least from our perspective. And so we said, we're not sure exactly why at this point, but every indication is it's more efficient. We believe it's better for the consumer, and it certainly looks like loan officers are attracted to it. So that's when we invested. So if you fast forward to 2021, you went through a cycle in 2020, of course, where it didn't matter what channel you were in, you were going to be extremely successful. But we said, we have to position for the inevitable downturn. And so we were heavily invested in wholesale, but we wanted to prove out, because I'm very analytically oriented, and frankly, it was tough for me to make a decision without a full set of analytics associated with kind of why you're doing it. But we recognized that the HMDA data starting in 2018 had enough information in it. They'd expanded the data set. So it had enough information so you could directly compare from a consumer view which channel was most beneficial to consumers. And lo and behold, from 18, 18, 19, 20, 21 data is all available now. And in each year, the data says going through a mortgage broker is better for a consumer. And in 21, it was to the tune of average of $9,400 a loan, if you look at both the payment stream as well as the upfront costs. So to me, it's like if you're investing in a business, what's best for the consumer, I mean, it has to win over time. And so it just, fortunately, we were already there. So it validated for us that was the case. That it was better for consumers. That kind of completed the decision, the data set from a decision making standpoint for us. But since we already made a decision, we said we need to get people to understand it. So I'm going to use my analogy from a consumer standpoint, because I think for consumers it's very confusing.
Yep.
They don't really understand the difference. So I've been trying this one out, and I try to take the product piece out of it. So like, forget it's a mortgage. It just consider it a service. And you're a consumer, and you talk to some friends. You say, I'm thinking about getting a service. And one of your friends says, hey, I just got that service, and I talked to two different providers of that service. So I'll give you their names, and you call each of those providers. And the first one says, I can provide you with that service. I have 5 suppliers that I work with to provide that service, through me. And what I do is I take your information, I work with each of those 5 suppliers in a way that results in me delivering to you the best possible combination, of elements of this service, based on your situation. And I say, that sounds pretty good. I like the sound of that. I go to the second provider, and the provider says, I have one. I go to the second service provider, and I have one supplier of that service, and I will provide you with that. And you say, well, you only have one? Like, yeah, but I work for that provider, so it's going to be, we're going to be able to handle you and take care of it. It's like, if you were a consumer and someone presented you with those 2 paths, where you have 5 suppliers who, by the way, get the raw materials from exactly the same place as the one other provider, and you had that versus one provider who works for that company, who's only interested in what that company does.
Yeah.
It's like, where would you go? And that is a broker whose superpower is choice versus a retail lender who doesn't have any other options. Like, like I say, if you have one choice, you have no choice. So I don't know. That's kind of like my latest version of trying to help consumers understand it in a way that's not, it takes the emotion of mortgage out, and it takes the, whatever the kind of people's preconceived notions about, what brokers are, what happened in the financial crisis, and simply says, man, I would always go to a provider that had 5 suppliers because you're going to give me a good deal.
But Willie, you said something, I was fortunate enough to spend a couple of days with you and your team this week. And you said something that really drives that point home. And if you may remember, you said those single providers, which we call retail, right? Because they're captive, right? They're not brokers. They don't have the wholesale channel, all the different lenders to send the loans to. They have one lender. But you said something. You said a lot of these guys say, well, yeah, we have the better service, we have the better rates, but who else has access to that same lender? Right?
Yeah, the broker.
The broker can also send it to that lender. And who has better rates between the retail and the wholesale? Because that lender would never get a loan from a broker through their wholesale channel if the rates weren't better than their retail offered. They would never get one. And so it's the argument has a big, vast hole in it. And so, I can appreciate the explanation. I think is great for consumers. You call this the broker advantage, and I know this is a big mantra of yours right now. And I'll tell you that we've made the choice, Jamie and I, on purpose to stay brokers. We could become bankers. We could have correspondent lines and do all those things. But we've made the choice because today it is the most efficient channel. It really is. And working with companies like Homepoint and others that have really decided to go all in on the wholesale side of things have just made it that much better.
Well, and to this point, Homepoint believes so much in the channel that you took those data analytics that you compiled, and I know you compiled them in a large way because you needed to see something tangible to help you go, yep, this was absolutely the right decision, let's go. But what you did was you opened it up to groups like AIM, the Association of Independent Mortgage Experts, and others to say, go out and share this information with your members, with the community, get it out in front of consumers so that they understand. We have this intersection here in town. It's right off of one of the main off-ramps here where we are. And there are 4 gas stations, one on every corner of this intersection. And the bottom line is, their prices for gasoline will vary up to 25 or 30 cents a gallon between the 4. But they're all pumping the same gasoline into your vehicle. So if you're a consumer, it's real simple when you're driving down the street and you look at the signs and you go, well, I'm going to pull into this driveway right here. Providing those kind of data analytics to us is helping us to break it down to our consumers in a way that they can understand. And we appreciate it.
Oh, well, thanks. Well, so, but it's to the point, a little bit to the point, and Brad, you were saying it too, is that I think one of the things that was very important from my perspective was to have one data source. So, fortunately, we were focused on it at Homepoint. We produced the information, we vetted the information, we talked to other parties about vetting it. And so it wasn't as much like Homepoint, did this, or this is about Homepoint. It's that it was important for me to have one source, because I think one of the challenges that a consumer has, as an example, is, Brad, exactly what you said, is like, and the way I think about it is like, every time a retail officer brings up an objection, it's like, I want to be able to counter it with fact. And so, because another thing that is said is that a broker is an intermediary. It's like you put in traditionally, you put intermediaries into a process. They're typically friction that take economics out of the process, right? It's like, that's not how it works here, because in part, the suppliers are in multiple channels. It's like they supply to wholesale and retail. So retail officer, well, you're going direct with us. And it's like, well, what do you mean? I can go to the broker, and they gave me the name of all 5 of their suppliers.
Yes.
And one of them is your company, and I can get it cheaper. So where's the friction there? So from a data standpoint, Jamie, it was really important for me to say, okay, let's try to make whatever we produce, or anybody else for that matter, let's make that the industry source. If we can agree that this is the industry source, then the consumer, regulators, whomever we're showing this to, won't be confused by another set of data that comes from somewhere else that says something different because someone has an angle.
That's right. Well, and we experience this all the time now. You know that our company, AmeriFund Home Loans, is growing, and we're recruiting a lot, and we bring originators from those retail channels into the wholesale channels. Some of them, most of them, for the first time ever, the exposure to it. And one thing that really resonates, and we have a really clear, the consumer can understand this very clearly. One thing that really resonates with these people that are moving over is, number one, wow, you guys have better interest rates than I have. But the explanation behind that is these retail organizations, and you had it, remember at the beginning with Homepoint, that distributed retail costs a lot. Number one, you've got physical locations that you are paying for. It's giant overhead that has to be covered. There's lots of layers of management because when it's distributed like that, you have to have the controls in place. Otherwise, it just does its own thing. And so those layers of management, the bonuses and the salaries and the rent and the phones and everything else that you're covering go into building the margins for that rate that you have to deliver to survive. Plus, especially if you're a publicly traded company, you have to provide profit for your shareholders, right? Private or public, right? But beyond that, the wholesale channel has none of that. There's none of those layers. Everything is borne by the origination opportunity. That company that's put together that opportunity, they cover all those expenses. And so you as a wholesale lender can deliver one low rate across the board to all brokers. Now it's up to the broker to limit their expenses so they can work on the smallest margins that they can work and benefit the consumer. And so, we appreciate what you've done, like Jamie said, and we're all in on it. I want to take just one more quick turn as we start to wind up here, and then Jamie will ask you our final question we like to ask our guests. But one more quick turn before that. You and I, we both have kids about the same age. You have a daughter that's 25. I have a son that's 26. And I'd just like to know what you say, because there's a lot of 25 to 30-year-olds out there that haven't bought their first home yet. What do you say to your daughter about that process? What do you say to her about, are you telling her to be patient? Are you, saying, hey, I'll help you buy it? Like, what's the practical advice that would apply to a lot of people out there on, their kids that are that age and they're like, I want to get into the real estate market, but I don't know how?
Yeah, well, as we talked about off camera, my oldest daughter lives in Pasadena, so her path to home ownership is probably more challenging than someone who lives here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. But I have we've talked about it because she has started to become interested, and part of it is that she's paying a lot in rent right now. Now, fortunately, she has a roommate; they have a nice house they rent, but she's paying a lot in rent. She's like, boy, I sure like to, and she's absorbed through osmosis, if nothing else, some of the things that we had talked about previously as far as, wealth accumulation, et cetera. But I said, listen, you take your time, really think about where you want to live, because it's probably not where you live today if you want to own. So I think patience is probably the number one thing that her and I have talked about.
And I think it's largely geographically related to your point. I mean, Southern California, whew.
Definitely.
Hard to get your foot in the door as a buyer, but people find a way. There's some outlying areas that are quite nice that have some more affordability, which is really great. Okay, final question, my favorite one. I get asked this often. What would you tell your 20-year-old self now, looking back and knowing what you know?
Oh my gosh. My 20-year-old self, what would I tell myself? I think I would tell myself to be humble. Like I was so full of myself for the longest time. Even as we started building, originally the original company's InterFirst. We started building InterFirst. I was very full of myself. Like I thought I was smarter than I was. I thought I knew more than I did. I was really fortunate, like I said, in that I had a mentor. He gave me a lot more opportunity than I probably deserved at a young age. And I did, I ended up doing something with it, but at the same time, I kind of felt a little bit like I deserved it. And I really, didn't. And I think fortunately, my parents instilled enough of a work ethic in me that I kind of overcame. I wasn't really it wasn't an entitlement thing. It was much more like, I got this. And I think that I would have been more well-rounded sooner if that were the case. And I think I would have made, I don't know, maybe a little bit better decisions from a business strategic standpoint. When, and I'll say my 30s and all that. I think now it's like I kind of feel like, and the kids are a big part of it because, they've humbled me to the point where it's like, I can't be cocky. It's like no one will pay attention to me. But I think that's what I tell myself, Jamie. It's like, be humble, because it's like when you're 20, you got a whole lot to learn.
Oh, that is so true, and it resonates with me. Brad's known me since, I was like 19 or 20 when Brad and I started working together, which was, 3 years ago. And
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, I can relate to quite a bit of what you said. And I think, too, it may be one of the reasons why culture has become so important to both of us, because we recognize through self-awareness some of the things that we could have done differently that would have impacted others in a more positive way earlier on. I think that leadership is such a responsibility, and I said it yesterday, guard it and use it well, because you have the ability to impact people's lives. And I think that you've done an absolutely phenomenal job of building a wonderful culture with your other leaders there at Homepoint. And, you've just always been a real genuine guy, Willie, and I've always appreciated our conversation. So we thank you so much for being on our show today.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. Thanks. I really appreciate the invite.
Get Real 411 is hosted by Brad Rice and Jamie Kavanaugh, produced by Stuart Jellin, and recorded live from the AmeriFund Home Loan Studio in Simi Valley, California. You can learn more about the show at getreal411.com and watch full episodes on YouTube. If you're interested in being a guest on Get Real 411, email booking@getreal411.com. Please subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.